So just have a seat in the corner and I'll just kind of explain what's going on here. You are under arrest for 4 counts of murder and 1 count of attempt murder.
I guess when I turned 18 and I started getting a little interested in politics, and I started doing research on the whole 2016 Trump election.
I was like, the media's being dishonest.
Because here we go again, the media's hyping up some stupid, it's not even like wrong that they're reporting it, but they'll only focus on one white on minority crime. They only focus on that to mess with the public and hype up the public and deceive the public into thinking that it's white people that are the violent ones when it's the other way around. That's completely disproportionate. Breaking point for me was the Muslim grooming gangs in the UK. That was it. I just snapped. I'm like, I'm done. I'm done. So I decided, all right, this is it. I'm gonna commit a terrorist attack. Reasons that for why I did what I did. Reason number 1 is to send a message to Muslim grooming gangs in the UK that you have to back off, and if you don't back off, more Muslims are going to die, and there will, because when people like me do things like this, it inspires other angry men to do the similar. Like, I would have never done what I did if it wasn't for other men that have done similar things. I'll be one of the people that gave them inspiration. You know, you could argue, well, children are innocent, they shouldn't die. Or people will say, oh, you're a coward, Nate, you're a coward, you killed innocent people. No, I'm actually giving Muslims a taste of their own medicine. Surprisingly easier than I thought, because I thought I was going to keep hesitating, because I kept hesitating and hesitating. I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. But when I actually stepped on the pedal, it was actually surprisingly easy. That's what the only thing they're going to respond to. You have to be extreme. If they don't respond to anything else. And if people know that their children are in danger, they are much less likely to try to piss them off if they know that, oh, it's not just me, it's also I'm endangering my children by my actions. But yeah, I don't regret what I did. I feel like I had to do it.
A lot about Muslim grooming gangs.
Yeah, because that was the number 1 thing that radicalized me for sure.
And their abuse of young white girls.
Yes.
Now, what would your reaction be then to a Muslim grooming gang and their abuse of a young Muslim girl or a young girl of a different race?
Well, I'm still against it, obviously. But even if they were doing it to, and I'm sure they do to some extent, but it's not at all the same to the same extent they do it to us. But even if they were to be abusing a member of their own race, if that's your culture or whatever, you cannot bring that here. Keep that in your own country. You can't. And that's why this multicultural society that we live in can't work. And everybody, and the smart people know that.
6 people are dead, several more critically wounded tonight following what is being called a terrorist attack on a Canadian mine.
Moi, je voulais sauver les gens.
Tu voulais sauver les gens?
Oui. Des attaques terroristes.
OK.
Tu sais.
À ta connaissance, toi, tu te souviens-tu comment tu as pu tirer de coup?
Non, je me rappelle pas. Peut-être 10.
Est-ce que tu t'es promené à l'intérieur? Tu te souviens-tu?
Non. Je me rappelle de rien de ça. OK? Vous m'avez dit qu'il y avait eu 6 personnes, puis ça, je trouve que ça se peut pas. Parce que j'ai tiré n'importe où. Ils vont venir comme tuer mes parents aussi, puis ma famille.
OK.
Ça, j'en suis convaincu.
OK.
Puis c'est ça, pour ça, tu sais que...
Le matin, tu écoutes la télé, tu vois un reportage ou quelque chose concernant que le Canada va accepter plus d'immigrants parce que les Américains disent qu'ils vont en accepter moins. Tu s'entends? C'est un peu ça, le...
Oui.
OK. Lorsque tu as pris ta décision, là, que c'est ça que tu allais faire,
Oui.
OK? Aller sauver des vies, là.
Oui.
Dans ta tête à toi, c'était...
Ben oui.
OK, parfait. Tu savais qu'il allait avoir des conséquences à ton geste.
Ben non, c'était pas mal pas tout. C'était pas mal du tout ce que j'ai fait.
Recording on Why is it that those seemingly the most empowered by their systems of government take the most drastic action in the highest frequency, like mass gun violence, terror, crime, and so on? Even though their God King is in power and wherever they are, why aren't their problems going away? Why does it seem like they are compounding instead? Why doesn't trying to deport people who do good or who try to do good by the communities, or who are just struggling to survive just like you are, why doesn't that make your life better? Domestic terrorism anywhere from a majority in-group thrives when there is an existing permission structure that transgresses some basic human values. Normalization doesn't just happen. Having classes of marginalized people is always going to benefit someone in a capitalist society. The larger structure requires your Ezra Kleins or Shashi Tharoors, the centrist neoliberal aesthetics of moral high ground from an already privileged position, to defang the ignorant masses, that is, us, and make us turn on each other. All these things are connected. Racism is by design. It is a feature, not a bug. The permission structure is expanded when required. That's when these moral high ground folks don't use their platforms, they keep quiet. And then when it's time to turn the target to another marginalized group, the think pieces come out on why the previous human atrocity was evil, and we're all like, where were you before? In India, you have Hindu nationalism operating on similar permission structures. It is socially acceptable among many Indian families, for instance, to blame random things on Muslims or the marginalized community in the area, especially in communities where the fascist BJP is trying to capture votes. This attitude is also more represented among the more affluent in society, who find it beneficial to turn the real rage on other ethnicities. The same goes for caste-based discrimination in service of capitalism. Conservative social media beaming out of Indian uncles' phones often depict stories of a lost mythical past that was taken away by this seemingly homogeneous majority in-group by a barbaric scapegoat, while the real minority, the ultra-rich, hide behind the pain and suffering of their own poor. This distraction keeps the masses from asking questions of those with real power. In the context of Canada, it is common to see privileged white men who spend a decent chunk of their time online imbibe their own alternative versions of reality, like this yearning to go back to a so-called simpler time in Canada. This rose-tinted glass idea that is as fragile as that description, especially when you realize that it may have been a simpler time only for a small minority of privileged people around the world who benefited from systems of exploitation in the past. It was simpler or better for whom? The right spends a lot of time on this aspect of myth-making and make-believe, employing a lot of their imaginative abilities into setting up this non-existent, seemingly infallible reality for themselves, where their world is white, their neighbors are white, their culture is white. Ideas like human cooperation and coexistence in the real world, like all of us are struggling to do, are offensive, especially when you want to hold at the same time this alternate constructed form of reality. It clashes with this ideal world that you've constructed for yourself, that you've been told to believe. And that is how you start thinking Canada is being overrun, Canada is being invaded, the whole world is coming at Canada in full force. A convenient narrative that creates this mass sense of collective victimhood and anxiety among an already privileged majority. This fantasy and myth essentially flattens the playing field between all white people in the past, flattening their economic statuses. And it pushes this idea that white folks struggling to pay rent today wouldn't have had to struggle in the past. It makes it plausible to believe that this is merely a new phenomenon, and it is this new invasion of brown people that's causing that. Once we get them all out, we'll all be equal again, like that simpler time fantasy, when the reality, of course, is far, far from that. I used to know an older French lady in Canada who was born in the early 1940s, and she passed away just last year. And from how she described her childhood, it was not sunshine and rainbows. It was not how many on the Canadian right describe a simpler time of imaginary neighborly love and white coexistence. It was hard. Her family had to survive through harsh poverty. They had to struggle for various reasons, including alcoholism. She even developed an addiction to candy later in life because that is not something she was able to access as a child. She had multiple siblings, some of whom died when they were little, and she did lead a painful life. Her being white didn't shield her from that poverty. The reality of poverty gets everyone. And what of the First Nations people, the children who were stolen, the residential schools which only closed in the 90s? In the face of all these facts and reality, the only way to remain a racist really is to stay intentionally in this reality bubble that you've created for yourself. And even if we were to accept that a place like Canada was simpler and whiter once upon a time, then how was that reality shaped by racial policies of segregation? Because borders of this kind of super high-tech immigration control are relatively recent. Humans have always migrated around the world. It takes relatively modern racial policies to increase the flow from certain countries while intentionally stemming the flow from others. In the case of all Western nations, for the longest time, that main criteria, that deciding factor, has always been race. And if you weren't white, then it was about how useful your labor was. And will you take no rights with that offer? And the reason why many people end up having to make these hard bargains, if they weren't kidnapped to begin with, is because a lot of Western governments did destabilize the governments and regions that are considered the third world. And I don't think it's even common knowledge in a place like Canada that India used to be a part of the same British Empire that Canada was a part of. India was called the jewel in the crown of the empire because Indian resource extraction fueled the engines that built things in the West. Entire personal family estates in England were built off loot from India. Now, this is not something to get offended at, especially if you're a white dude in the same economic boat as the rest of us. It's just basic history. Migration used to happen a lot more freely between these colonies of the British Empire. However, with the 1900s came the European invention of race science, full of popular and convenient stories that justified the dominance of European groups over other groups. No, it wasn't the serial dishonoring of treaties, assassinating rulers who disagreed with you and installing a puppet ruler picked off of the street. It wasn't stoking interreligious tensions by intentionally using religious traditions against a population. It wasn't stealing food while allowing an indigenous population to starve. No, it was because they were genetically superior, or so they say. A perfect absolver of guilt that continues to be used today. Race science was popular in Canada as well, which is why state resources were directed for generations to systematically genocide an entire culture based on race when we're talking about the First Nations of Canada. And when it came to the so-called lesser, unassimilable races, according to them, within other British colonies. Canada, along with the British and the US, came up with the Continuous Journey Regulation in 1908 to specifically stop immigration from India, which at the time, of course, was a colony of the same empire. Like the $100,000 fee imposed on new H-1B seekers from India to the US, Canada in 1908 had a fee of $200 if you were from India and only $25 if you were from Europe. And not only that, they declared that you could not enter Canada if you were on a ship that had multiple stops. It had to be a continuous journey. So when a group of Sikhs decided to collect the money to fulfill their own requirement and buy a ship themselves and pool in their resources to make this incredible trip, and again check off all the discriminatory policies, Canada did not expect it, and the racism trumped the rules that they themselves created. I covered this error a little bit more in my normalization video, so check that out as well. But I say all this to remind people that some things, some narratives, if they sound too good to be true, they usually are too good to be true. We must always remember when we hear these convenient, experience-flattening stories, it may have been simpler for your family, but it wasn't for most, even if you were white. Not to mention for non-white people, slavery and mechanized exploitation was and still is a reality. So what is this simpler time we're talking about? I don't think it's ever existed. It is merely a comforting lie these groups tell themselves, and it's how the right functions across the world, not just in Canada. These ideas and stories are not unique. A crumb of hope goes a long way for billionaire-bought politicians to dangle over you so that you eat each other. Did you know that between 2016 and 2021 in Canada, more Muslims were actually killed in targeted hate killings than in any other G7 nation? Canada is also the smallest G7 nation. And it's not just about Muslims either, right? To the surprise of virtually no one, many of these guys can't tell the difference between brown people. No one is checking the religion, caste background, or nationality of brown people before a hate crime happens. In fact, a lot of Sikhs face the brunt of it whenever there's an uptick of white supremacist, racist violence. Another common racist cope is, well, Indians have caste though, as if to justify racism, right? I can guarantee you that none of those commenters can tell what the caste background is of anyone in any of these videos they're commenting on. It is only used as a racial cudgel. In the UK, you've got Yaxley Lemon over here, or whatever his name is, leading anti-immigration marches, while he himself is an immigrant from Ireland. Like, bro, look in the mirror, like, weren't you guys also colonized by England? And why was this dude so shocked when he got deported from two foreign nations? Because he's actually proved that he's a threat to national security. A lot of white supremacists, weirdly enough, love to travel, right? And a lot of them pick brown countries to travel to. They exploit the hospitality of the places they visit, take videos smearing entire communities, all the while take advantage of the exchange rates. Then they go back to the Western nations they came from and then justify racism towards other brown people in those Western nations. Usually saying something like, oh, I've been to India, I've seen how terrible XYZ is there. We should definitely get them out of our country. In Australia, you've got this goober leading the pro-hate crime marches, right? Oh, and he's not Australian either. He's from New Zealand. Of course he is, because this is not about immigration, yo. Like, this is just racism. Now, racism against Indians is like a cottage industry on YouTube. There's a lot of money in hate and exploitation on here, unfortunately. Canadians, there's no secret Indian cabal controlling your rent. Pushpik Sidhu's dad is not controlling your housing stock. Question why the government pulled public housing funding, which in turn let public housing rot Ask them why they don't go harder on mega corporations, hedge funds, and these annoying finance bros who own large swaths of the housing. Why don't all these anti-immigration, pro-hate crime protesters direct their energy to demanding lower rents and stuff like from their landlords? After all, most of these people are probably renting in the same neighborhoods or the same apartment building as a lot of the people they consider outsiders. They are literally on the same boat. I'm guessing when some of these anti-immigration protests happen in big cities, there's a lot of people who live in the rural areas who come down, like they drive through the country, they spend hard-earned money that they claim is it's now scarce because of us, on gas and hotel fees and whatnot, just to come join in these hate marches. Like, if you're driving around for this, like, you're just doing it for the love of the game, I think. So we need to ask the question, like, what is keeping these people who are complaining about resources not going their way, what is keeping them from banding together with other workers, even if it's for a seemingly self-interested thing, like reducing your own rent, Racism beats logic every single time. But I also have to say that I actually love living in Canada. I moved here quite recently. I'm one of these dirty Indians who is apparently ruining Canada. But I do actually love it here. I have some nice friends. I love the weather. I love how diverse it is as well, and the geese are pretty funny. And I love how, in general, the people are quite nice. But just like living anywhere, there are things that can harm me. And they can harm me through the coordinated attempts of certain groups and individuals to demonize and villainize people who look just like me for whatever problems the majority population has locally. And I know there's a loud minority of white dudes who, cry about me never being Canadian and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's true. For you, we never will be Canadian because that's how white supremacy works. I don't pass the first test of whiteness because I'm not white. Okay, like, we get it. Like, some of you guys want to build some weird, like, Christian white ethno state or something, right? In peace. Go back to a simpler time, as you say. Another really common talking point by white supremacists about Indians is, why do Indians want to make another India in Canada? Bro, why do you have Irish pubs outside Ireland then? Like, why do you have Irish pubs in Canada or any other country for that matter? Why do you have Chinatown? Speaking of Chinatown, like, look up what Vancouver did to the Chinese, Japanese, and Indian people in the 1900s. Why do French quarters exist outside of France? Or French bakeries? Why do we have cafes marketing themselves as Aussie cafes? Aussie specialty coffee or whatever. Or Italian coffee. What's Canadian about that, by your own logic? What's Canadian about Little Italy or Little Portugal? Shouldn't you be learning one of the Anishinaabe languages if you live in Ottawa, for example? But no, you have 2 European languages from across a freaking ocean. You're listening to this video right now from an Indian in English. Why do you think I know English? At this point, just accept you're racist, man. There's no need to embarrass yourself with this line of logic. You really want these places to stay European? Well, stop drinking coffee then. Literally all coffee is grown in the global south by pretty much the same people you cry about wanting to deport. Stop drinking matcha. Stop drinking chai. Those are not European either. Give us back our spices. Shut down your yoga studios and stop opening up so many new ones. Do you see how stupid, shallow, and reductive this line of logic is? Divide and rule is the name of the game, and we are just one sucker after another. Just falling for the oldest tricks in the book. And of course, it is also the made-up concept of race, these constructed European fantasies of an imaginary perfect race and culture that is now being lost. And it is being replaced by a deviant barbaric one. In this case, marked with brown skin. And that is what most of these videos coming out of Canada show, right? If we are to believe the videos coming out of Canadian social media bubbles, then we are to believe that Canada is being overrun with Indians. Even though people of Indian descent only make up like 7% of the entire Canadian population. This kind of content is lapped up by other Canadians who share the same racism. They do insane numbers, right? Like, because they get to agree with other races from and form their little hateful online bubbles, which used to be done behind closed doors, right? Already. For a lot of people, racism is like, or saying racist things is like talking about the weather. It's small talk for a lot of people. You know, other white races from other countries, you know, like Germans, Irish people, whatever, they travel and they bond over racism. You know, I've seen this happen in person. And the funny thing is that, as a lot of non-white people will know, they also slip up a lot. There are many things that are said behind closed doors in white families as well that a lot of people wouldn't say to brown and black people in person, but they do slip up a lot, especially when they get comfortable and they forget that you're brown, right? It's just pre-existing white supremacist attitudes coming out in real life, basically. They've always felt like this, they're just less ashamed of it now. It's not a new phenomenon. The reality is, most of us are merely like multicolored rats in a maze, running for scraps of cheese, drip-fed to us to increase competition and infighting and division over perceived differences, while those with real power swim in the cheese. Every nation has its majoritarian in-group that hoards wealth and leeches off the poor. These countries are no different. So when you're thrown a bone, like an AI-generated video or photoshopped image of an elderly Indian person pooping in public seemingly or something, you bite willingly, ready to throw all your weight behind a racist lie. And forget doctored images, you bit on a baseless rumor that didn't even need photographic evidence. The infamous pooping on beaches white supremacist lie is a great example of this. Many of you willingly jumped on that and believed it because it confirmed your biases. It felt good to see that other people were validating these deep-rooted beliefs that you already had. So you believed it without any fact-checking, without any evidence. There will be people watching this who still don't know that that was a rumor, because that's how racism works. It's not about truth. It's not about truth. It's not about fact. It's about demonization and generalization. You can make up whatever rumor you want about people. If those people you're speaking to are already geared or primed against the group you're talking about, they're probably going to believe you. So this is not a video in which I campaign for the humanity of people who look like me or something. I see no reason to do that. People who look like me are not victims. We are not helpless. We know how to fight back and know how to speak for ourselves. And there's more of us around the world than there are these weirdos. If we are human, then we are human, faults and all. That is a bit of a non-negotiable factor. If you think otherwise, then you're just being willfully ignorant and opportunistic. And there is simply no excuse for that today. If you can find movies online, then you know how to use the internet. And there is no excuse for still thinking that different races are biologically different species and with different intellectual capabilities that are incompatible. You know, like how people say XYZ group is incompatible with Western whatever. Like, to put it simply, human beings don't work like D&D characters, right? Like, I know in D&D you have the concept of races having inbuilt characteristics like racial traits and stuff, like, and I like D&D, but people do actually view real life human beings through that lens. You know, it's kind of weird. And then we have the comments, you know, like, I'm not racist, but your culture is backwards and barbaric and blah blah blah. You'll get people using like personal anecdotes to justify racism, like, oh, I had this one Indian neighbor who did this or that to me, therefore I'm allowed to be racist. Or this one Indian family didn't say hi to me in the elevator, how dare they? They deserve the racism. Like, what the hell? Canadian culture is being lost due to these rude third worlders, you know, or English culture is being lost. A lot of people don't say hi to me either, okay? And you don't see me marching in protest to get them deported, you know? That's like me saying that Nazis were white and therefore all white people are Nazis. Doesn't make a lot of sense when you put it that way, does it? So why is it okay when you employ that same generalization towards Indians? Speaking of England, you know, all these goobers marching for pro-hate crime and anti-immigration, this is just a self-own. It's a bit of an own goal. If I were being nice, you can see English culture in two ways. Here's the nice way. It's an amalgamation of different cultures coming together to create something new, right? We can share our love of Vindaloo and tea, you know, and other shared culture. But no. Instead, these goobers are crying about multiculturalism doesn't work. If that is true, then here's the other explanation for English culture. It is a culture of thievery, banditry, genocide, and drug running. And none of that is an exaggeration. London's Industrial Revolution would never have happened if it weren't for Indian labor and expropriation, which is to say, thievery. England was in deep in World War II, and so they had to bring over the dirty, smelly Indians to help them. So 2.5 million dirty, smelly Indians volunteered to fight the Nazis, right? I've mentioned it before, but it bears repeating because this is not common knowledge for some reason. If it weren't for them, Billy Bell-Bottoms over here would be speaking German. The Beatles might have been singing about free England from Nazi oppression or something, you know. Aussies, I see you is marching, moaning and about migrants too, while being on stolen land. How many did you put up in World War II? Canada, your white nationalists say the same thing, you know. How many did you put up? So even if the arguments are along the lines of, well, the Europeans are the ones who did all the fighting in the wars and blah, blah, blah. You need to earn your keep and you've built nothing and done nothing. If you know, you know. Just say you're racist, bro. Like, you don't have to make up all these stories. You know, a lot of you guys are open about it already. Just out yourselves. By the way, if you know this channel, if you know me already, you'd know that this is not something I tie to like Western nations specifically or something, you know. Just peep my channel. You'll see what I mean. I'm not even saying that Indians or anyone from South Asia is perfect and can do no wrong. I don't believe in exceptionalism. I don't believe in Indian exceptionalism or the exceptionalism of any group on the planet. Why? Well, Israel's genocide is the end state of ethno-nationalism and exceptionalism. Ethno-nationalism can only function through exclusion and dehumanization of another human population. And I'm not about to bring up the like, ooh, how many tech CEOs are Indian nonsense either. Like, I don't agree with that either. Those people are the problem as well. They are literally billionaires. They do not care about you. All they care about is leeching off of you. You know, all they care about is maintaining their permanent underclass so their rich kids can get together with other rich kids and continue this new feudal system that we have going. So yeah, we do lots of wrongs, you know, just like everyone else because we're human. And like other humans, we have what you would call a political spectrum within our populations. Okay, like I don't know why I need to explain this. Last time I checked, being a morally homogeneous hive mind that is perfect for white sensibilities was not a qualifier for humanity. Now let's spend some time focusing in on the biggest justification most Canadians give for racism against Indians. Housing, rent, and so on. You know, people say stuff like, our children can't afford houses. Why do we let so many Indians in when we already have our own people on the streets? You know, the usual hiding behind young people and the downtrodden. Left behind by their own systems, by the way, to justify racism from a perceived moral high ground. It can be any number of racist generalizations. You know, I can literally, it's like the fantasy, you know, Dungeons and Dragons example I used before, where it's whatever you want, really. You know, like I saw someone on Reddit the other day, like saying something like, Indians are like really servile naturally and will accept lower wages and have no respect for their living conditions, so they can pack themselves, into a little apartment, like 10 of them. They do it on purpose, so they can live like sardines. All the while ignoring the fact that, look, a lot of young white people as well have to have roommates these days because it's just not affordable to live on your own. If you're living on your own in a major city and you're young, you're doing pretty well. Okay. Not to mention, like, why do you think some races are naturally servile? Like, what's up with that? Like, that's literally like 1900s, bro. Like, what century are you living in? Where did you learn all this biological essentialism nonsense? Like, who taught you that? I think we can all agree that, having cheaper prices and lower rents is a good thing, despite what your political ideology is or where you land in the spectrum. Most cities around the world have this same problem in different degrees. Builders are building slowly. There are a lot of builders looking to build luxury apartments instead of affordable ones, and so on in major cities. And you have the poorer sections pushed to the outskirts of the outer city limits. Mumbai, London, Toronto, LA, Tokyo, they all have the same problem. The root of this issue is where many of us will disagree on. That is, housing should be a human right and not a tradable commodity for profit. This very real economic problem is what is used every time a Canadian justifies racism against Indians. White supremacists everywhere actually use the same talking point, and they all cry about the same thing, all while the root cause of the problem remains untouched. Even if you do get your mass deportations, right? And all the Indians were deported, guess what? You'll still be for housing. How much do you think the rich people who own most of the housing in Canada care about your whiteness or religion or whatever when it comes to receiving their rent checks, right? They don't care about these things when they're extracting rent from you. Do you think they'll give you a discount because you're white or something? No, like, you'll still be struggling, and probably more now, because if your mass deportation thing happens, you'll have a labor shortage, which you already kind of do. Everything will take longer. In an already crippled system, will take longer and cost more. Your landlords will still charge you more for rent, and builders will still build less, and your housing is probably going to stay expensive. You'll just create a new class of white people now who you will racialize once more for made-up characteristics and scapegoat, because it's easier than challenging the rich. It's happened before. I've spoken about the cagot in France before. Check out this video if you're interested in that. As long as housing is a tradable commodity for profit, and the government does not address the very real growing inequality in society by looking at how resources are distributed amongst the population, this problem will persist. Rich people will want to make money off housing. It's as simple as that. You can cry all you want about, it's feminism, deport, immigration, blah, 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 trans-tifa, Indian fatigue, whatever, whatever the new conspiracy theory is. None of this is going to fix your housing crisis. So allow this dirty Indian curry muncher to remind some of you of your own history. A time when Canada actually did an amazing job at addressing a housing crisis. Canada in the 70s experienced a really bad housing crisis. In fact, according to the government itself, in the early 70s, even moderate income Canadians had trouble with being priced out of the housing market. And in response, the government launched the FHAP, the Federal Housing Action Program, which saw the state build more social housing, subsidize rents, and provide discounted mortgages for home buyers. This program was a massive success. By the end of the 70s, the government had brought down housing prices, and workers could now actually buy homes. And those who preferred to rent had a good array of options to select from, of good quality social housing, available at any income. homelessness was just a marginal phenomenon. I must say, your current biases might cause you to react immediately and say, well, there were less people back then and we didn't, bring in so many migrants and so on and so forth. There was less housing actually even back then. That little available stock was also incredibly expensive. According to the Canadian government, the Minister of State for Urban Affairs at the time stated the objective of the program was to tackle a number of important housing problems facing Canadians. The FHAP program sought to stimulate the residential construction industry to ensure an adequate supply of housing to meet the needs of middle and low income families. Mortgage funds for modest homes and rental units, control of high ratio loans, increase the market for modest homes via government programs, to introduce a greater degree of stability for the industry to function well. They had a target of 1 million additional units by the end of 1979. They wanted to reduce the affordability problem, reduce the carrying cost of modest homes, make rental construction more attractive to investors, stimulate employment in the residential sector as well. In his 1977 report, evaluating the Federal Housing Action Program, Richard Petty, the Assistant Director of the Program Evaluation Unit, Corporate Planning Division, noted that the problem concerning supply and price had two facets. First, in 1975, it seemed unlikely that production to 1979 would keep pace with projected needs. Production at the time, both public and private, reached only a level of 231,500 units in 1975. Over the following 4 years, it was calculated that a further 1 million units would need to be built. Related to the question of supply was the fact that units being produced for ownership were increasingly priced beyond the means of even moderate income Canadians. Second, the supply problem in the rental sector was particularly acute, with production decreasing dramatically and vacancy rates of less than 2% in most Canadian cities. He also noted on the affordability side that the problem of excessive demand for higher priced housing was a difficult one to qualify and deal with. Many Canadians who had bought homes under more favorable conditions of house price, mortgage interest rates and income were now in a position to demand higher quality housing and were bidding prices up. The fact that housing was obviously a good investment also contributed to price inflation. The resources of the residential construction sector were in large part being diverted to satisfy this new demand in wanting higher quality housing for people who already had houses. This obviously was to the detriment of low and moderate cost housing. This is happening right now as well. If you'd like to read the whole report, it's easily available on the Government of Canada's website. Here's the title. From 1972 onwards, between 10 and 20% of all housing built in Canada was public, non-profit or co-op owned. These units came from various affordability covenants that anchored prices. Suddenly, private landlords had to now compete with a rather robust public sector that prioritized affordability instead of wealth extraction. This lowered costs for everyone. During this time, renters could actually have their monthly payments subsidized through the Assisted Rental Program, or ARP. People who earned lower incomes who wanted to own a home could now secure below market rate mortgages directly from the federal government. Or they could even have their private mortgages subsidized through the Assisted Home Ownership Program, or AHOP. All of these initiatives produced a real tangible benefit for most Canadians, as prices were successfully stabilized. In Toronto, where participation in FHAP programs was really high, real housing costs fell by 30% between 1974 and 1978. Check this graph out. It shows how provinces with a higher rate of participation in this FHAP program had a more stabilized and reduced housing cost, while those with lower rates of participation, like Alberta, saw home prices rise with inflation. Of course, not everyone was happy about these wins. The business class, right-wingers, and rich people began to cry about how this housing policy was essentially an instrument to redistribute wealth in favor of lower income households. So in the 80s came a new election cycle, and it was deemed necessary during that election to commercialize the nation's housing policies. Ottawa stopped subsidizing rents and mortgages and slowed down investment in social housing. They stopped doing things that were clearly working for most people. The government refocused to support the private sector. And of course, prices rose. Multiple people who were previously housed began to be unhoused, and they could not become a new renter again under the new policies and climate. The rising prices in the 80s led to the homelessness epidemic that Canada is still facing today, and it only gets worse. Despite the private sector showing Canada in the 80s that it could not manage all of the nation's housing needs, the federal government doubled down. And in 1992, Canada ended the co-op housing program. And by the middle of the 90s, it stopped funding the construction of new affordable housing. The federal government essentially washed its hands of housing entirely, and responsibility was shifted to the provinces, which were further then delegated to municipalities to deal with. With intentional lack of funding, the existing social housing stock languished, and a once successful public housing system was just left to rot. Also, a rich minority could suck more profits out of everyday Canadians. And by the early 2000s, Canada's national housing program, which had generated more than half of the country's affordable homes, was resigned to the history books. And by the time Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, the problem had come back again. The depths of inequality really had begun to show itself once more, and prices were spiraling in another painful cycle. But I didn't mention earlier that the FHAP and everything that happened in the 80s was under Trudeau's dad's government, Pierre Trudeau. Just like his father, Justin decided that he would also need a bold plan to try and solve this housing crisis. So he launched the NHS, or the National Housing Strategy. However, the NHS is not the FHAP. The FHAP actually saw the government build housing not for profit, explicitly. The NHS, on the other hand, was a public-private partnership kind of situation, which is to say the government outsourced it to a bunch of profiteering developers who sold their builds to the highest bidder. Speculators of all sizes were getting their hands in this. Faceless hedge fund, no problem. Random finance bro looking to flip a house? Sure. Slumlord who already owns thousands of rental properties? Okay. At the end of the day, most of these developers only care about who pays the highest. So they'll over average Canadians at the drop of a hat, because it's profit over people. Trudeau's neoliberal capitalist plan, which was disguised with these liberal aesthetics of social welfare, led to an even higher housing price, with the already rich getting richer, while everyday Canadians couldn't even get their foot in the door, unless they had like generational wealth to help them buy at these inflated rates. So this time, even though Canada did end up building more housing than what was needed to accommodate the population, and yes, that's true, Canada actually built more housing than what was needed this time, yet the prices still went up. So no, just building housing is not the solution. It's about who owns the houses already and why. Is it because you want to live in it and start a family, Or is it just another asset that you're speculating off of while keeping a possible first-time Canadian homebuyer out? Almost 8% of Canada's national housing stock, that's 1.3 million homes, are just sitting there empty, simply collecting value for resale. 1.3 million homes. How many TikTok trends are talking about this? Instead of harassing random Indians trying to make a living and dealing with the same housing crisis in the same economy. Nearly 250,000 homes are also listed on popular short-term rental platforms. You know which ones. Which represents 4.9% of Canada's long-term rentals. Large financial firms own 30% of all rental housing, which is up from, by the way, 1.6% 30 years ago. Hear me again. Large financial firms own 30% now of all rental housing, which is up from 1.6% 30 years ago. Edmonton is the worst here, with 48% of all rental housing held by financial entities. Canadians, your housing crisis is not caused by evil Indian immigrants, okay? Like they are not like the cause of your toilet not working or your flight not showing up on time, and enter a number of inconveniences caused by greedy profiteering companies. Your housing crisis was caused by abandoning good policy, catering to greedy boomer landlords, large corporations, hedge funds, and finance bros. Any anti-finance bro marches happening, by the way? I mean, you clearly have the energy to be putting on all these anti-immigration protests. So, any of this happening? Canada doesn't have a population problem. It has the funds and the resources and housing stock to meet demand. No, what really needs to be addressed is the investor greed problem. So, instead of murdering random Indian students, harassing families in public while calling them the N-word, or in the case of the UK, beating them and beating them with bats in front of the police, maybe take your grievances to the finance pros and landlords and hedge funds. And I know, by the way, that we'll see a bunch of Indian pick-me's in the comment section for this one who didn't make it through like 5 minutes of this before commenting. They'll be climbing over themselves to be one of the good ones, okay? By saying that racism against Indians is actually justified. Enter, whatever number of internalized racist nonsense, etc. You guys are part of the problem. Trust me, the racists are not going to spare you. Especially if you don't even have the backbone to stand up for people who are supposedly from your own community, okay? The housing crisis in Canada is not a bug. It is not a failing for a certain class of Canadians, actually. It is a win. It is a feature of neoliberal capitalism. If you are a new landlord, you will obviously seek to sell your house for a higher price or demand a higher rent that can sustain your, in criminally high mortgage. So you can thank neoliberal capitalism for that one. Like, how do you get human beings in a developed world and first world democracy to use a basic necessity to any life form survival, like shelter? And how do you use that to dehumanize a whole group of people? The depths of depravity. So usually when you have a scapegoating operation done by a white supremacist government or whatever it might be, or so some of these, far-right groups, you always have non-white people who seek acceptance from the white majority that holds power. It doesn't matter if you're black, if you're brown. Pick-me's come in every shape and color. But I'm just gonna show you some pick-me's from my community. Anyway, I came across this dweeb from the UK demanding to know what Indians did in Canada to the poor Canadians who are known to be so nice. We must have done something because in the UK, apparently they're living good. Brother, I don't know what rich papa you have who allows you to be in this privileged bubble, okay, and have this like horse blinder approach to life. But throwing other Indians under the bus to get approval from white people by literally saying, oh, we're fine here, they treat us, they love us, they treat us well and whatnot, is a bit of a snake move, okay? If you were to show up in public and try that exact same thing in front of a bunch of white anti-immigration protesters, please also film for all of us how that goes, because you'll find real quick that you are not part of the club. Just like how this uncle from Australia found out. Okay, Indian kids, I'm pretty sure like all of you have an uncle like this, okay? Please keep them inside the house, okay? They are a house uncle, okay? Like turn on the TV for them, play the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man or something. No, actually, let them see some, brown people in heroic roles for a while. Actually, you need to deprogram them a little bit. So, show them Minnal Murli, okay, on Netflix. They'll get to see some heroics from brown people. The Pick Me Epidemic is always the runny nose, I guess, to this illness of anti-immigration racism online, which comes in waves every year, like clockwork, As I mentioned before in my video on the normalization of hatred towards Indians, racist white supremacist violence coming out of the US, Canada, Australia, UK, and so on is not new. They have a very long history that is rooted in the colonial era. And when it comes to conflict between workers, they typically happen for the same reasons. On one hand, it's economic, with people citing deteriorating material conditions, and on the other hand, capitalism actually requires exploitation and expropriation to remain viable. Exploitation is a feature of capitalism. Many must suffer so that a few may prosper. Capitalism needs a class of vilified, demonized, underpaid people to rip off, to produce things for cheap and make exorbitant profits. This class of vilified human being is thrown to the more privileged workers as red meat, an offering, a sacrifice, or a distraction to vent their anger on. And the ones in power are scared. Why else would tech billionaires be openly and desperately talking about using the internet to subvert democracy and streamline discrimination? This video could be taken down like that. Discrimination is not accidental, it is intentional. And it is taught from generation to generation. No one comes out of the womb filled with hate. Nazis exist because their parents, parishes, or society taught them to be Nazis. If you've been paying attention to the occurrences around the world, a string of racist, white supremacist violence and hate crimes have plagued Western nations recently, with multiple racially motivated murders and sexual assaults happening in the UK, Canada, and so on. There are some basement-dwelling creatures who will say, well, if you don't like it, then go back to where you came from. But that's exactly what we're not going to do, because if you need to deal with the bully in the yard, there's only one way to do that. You need to stand up to them. Let's talk a little bit about these Canadian white supremacists. Now, unfortunately for these goobers, most of their racist ideas have been imported from the US. Their anti-vax movement, the trucker nuisance in Ottawa, the KKK, all these white supremacist groups link back to the US in some way or another. They are Americox. If America were to actually invade, then they'd be the first ones to line up to lick Trump's feet. Sometimes I feel like it's like these guys need to see a shallow reflection of themselves and their ideas represented in anyone they interact with. They project their insecurities and biases and their hatred on others whom they are told are weaker than them or lesser than them. And when they do meet like-minded racists, it's like this narcissistic circle jerk of reaffirmation. I am human and I am racist, therefore this is human and only this is human. Many haven't been socialized with people who don't sound exactly like them. And many haven't been taught about basic history either. So it's really easy to stuff white supremacist garbage into the voids in many people's heads. Many of these dweebs can't even process the fact that Jesus was a brown person from the Middle East. And if Jesus were alive right now, they definitely send him to alligator Auschwitz or something and call for him to be deported. The willingness for a lot of people to indulge in the hatred has gotten so bad that Canadian comment sections have basically become synonymous with anti-Indian hate speech now. When that Air India plane went down and 271 Indians died, many people online mocked the deaths and called for more. When Charandeep Singh allegedly committed suicide, many celebrated his death as well and called for more. And many others just kept quiet from the sidelines. Another very famous and damaging Canadian-made, Canadian-manufactured stereotype of Indians is this made-up allegation of public defecation on beaches, a convenient affirmation of white supremacist rhetoric and slander of brown people. This allegation stemmed from Wasaga Beach and began with one video of a racist white woman on TikTok claiming that she had a friend who saw it happen. She then doubled down in another video saying that there's an epidemic apparently of immigrants pooping on beaches, and she specifically said that it's not locals, it's immigrants, and again provided no evidence at all. A reporter for The Star also pressed her on why she hasn't collected more evidence yet, because in one of her earlier videos she did say that she had planned to stalk the beaches for extended periods of time by setting up cameras to catch Indian men in the act, apparently. To which she responded that because one of her videos had gotten so viral, she was now recognized around town and she couldn't go to the beach as much anymore. Okay, so basically it was a straight up lie. The city even got involved and investigated the whole thing because, of course, white people obviously will believe a random white woman. And lo and behold, they found no evidence either. Soon after, it started to become very clear that this was just another in a long string of racist white supremacist lies. Although some of you watching still believe it, I'm sure. Some other Canadians decided to stage a video and they did like a skit of it, which again many people believed was actually real. Why? Because you're racist. Then you had that really terrible situation with people photoshopping an elderly Sikh man pooping at a gas station, which worst Photoshop job ever, but the gas station itself released their security camera footage in which you can clearly see that it was fake. The Photoshop job had the man wearing shorts, and the video itself showed that at the exact same time he was actually wearing full pants, and he didn't do what the Photoshop job claimed that he did or tried to portray that he did. Yet many Canadians willingly shared it, further fueling the racist slander against all Indian immigrants. It became so commonplace that a lot of people who didn't even see any of these things that I just mentioned just started to believe that, oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, Indians do poop on beaches, right? Oh, that's happening. Yeah, that's happening. That's definitely happening. It has to be. If so many people are saying it, of course it's happening, right? Racism 101. Rather than dispelling the baseless white supremacist lie, Doug Ford actually gave the town $1 million to build washrooms and hire more staff instead, and even said, don't be pooping on beaches, thereby legitimizing the racist misinformation. This is how racist narratives online can directly translate into real-world violence or even public policy shaping. All this obsession by the Canadian right, when it comes to pooping is reminding me of something. That time the American-funded America truckers invaded Ottawa and kept openly defecating on local churches and infrastructure and pissing on statues and stuff. A lot of people don't want to reckon with the white supremacist policies that caused that incident in the first place. And, learning about this stuff is not about making anyone feel like bad about their history or something. No, this is from a purely, utilitarian perspective. If you want to be a fucking machine about it, or, objective about it. If you don't know these things, then you'll be easily bamboozled in the future, and your taxpayer money will be going to wasteful things that didn't need to be, like this $1 million to create, toilets for a problem that didn't even exist, for example. That's a good example right there. Many Canadians also don't know about the 1907 anti-Asian riots that happened, that spilled into the streets of Vancouver from Bellingham, Washington. Those riots specifically targeted Japanese, Chinese, and Indian workers. Many Canadians at the time marched through the streets calling for a white Canada. Trying to harm your own species is not exactly a logical thing to do. It's like trying to get humanity to take an L by demonizing like a large swath of your own people. I haven't even seen any major politicians even accept that there's been a 200+% increase in anti-Indian racism and hate in Canada. It's really interesting, like you like our chai, you like our spices, you go to our Indian restaurants, our traditions, like yoga, meditation. You have a lot of doctors from India, a lot of nurses from India, a lot of lawyers, chefs. There's our labor as well that megacorps, use for cheap as well. But you do not like us. What's the explanation for that? Like, what's that? There's a gap there, right? Like, there's a certain level of disgust towards us. It's been well documented for a long time that there is a visceral reaction of disgust that happens within racists when they see a darker skinned individual or someone who's slightly different from them. It's a disgust that's been taught and passed down through generations, and it's been especially hard for humans to shake. In fact, it's only gotten worse with the internet, because with the internet you can do everything I just stated. You can make up videos, you can broadcast your racism to your 700,000 followers, and create like a mini reality bubble online and expand that and validate hatred of your own people. Like every sci-fi novel that cautions the end of the world because of technology, you're literally doing it. When the dumbest dude in your friend group suddenly becomes an expert in immigration stats and demographics and real estate suddenly, and how the Indians are the reason for everything. Like if it's your plane not arriving on time, or your McDonald's being too late, or your Tim Hortons not being good enough, or whatever, that person's been spending too much time online, and now they think they're actually smart because they have like this cause that they certainly believe in their miserable existence. This cause of, that's true, I need to care about Canada, I need to kick out these Indians. That's how I will find meaning in my life, right? Getting this dopamine rush off of agreeing with other racists online who have the same opinions of you. And some of these opinions that you learn probably from a bot. That's the reality right now. And you just believe it. And speaking of Tim Hortons, you don't even know that Tim Hortons is not even Canadian anymore. It's owned by an American Brazilian conglomerate or something, and they are responsible for the drop in the quality of Tim Hortons, and Tim Hortons suddenly wanting to use slave labor, and picking Indians to exploit to do that. But you just cannot, despite all this information being easily accessible, you just can't shake the reasoning that no, it's still Indians actually who are the problem. Like, if you think this, yes, you are racist. It's just what it is. There's a lot of hand-wringing when it comes to how hate crimes and terrorist attacks and things of that nature are defined in Canada. The government officially has different designations for different kinds of terrorist incidents, ranging from IMVE, or ideologically motivated violent extremism, to PMVE, or politically motivated violent extremism, and RMVE, or religiously motivated violent extremism. Of all these types, IMVE, or ideologically motivated violent extremism, is the one responsible for the most deaths in Canada. According to the Canadian government, been underneath a lot of the careful language, they admit that it is the biggest threat from within. They define IMVE as a complex and ever-evolving problem, and they say that it's influenced by a range of different beliefs rather than a single belief system. To quote the government, extreme racist, misogynistic, and anti-authoritarian views combined with personal grievances can result in an individual's willingness to incite, enable, or mobilize to violence. As you would have figured out, IMVE is Canada's colorblind way of saying white terror. On June 6, 2021, Nathaniel Veltman, a self-proclaimed white nationalist, ran over a brown Muslim family of 4 in his Dodge Ram pickup truck. This happened in London, Ontario. On October of that same year, Patrick Matthews, a former Canadian military reservist from Manitoba, was sentenced to 9 years in a US prison for plotting a terrorist attack and trying to incite a race war alongside other members of the Base, a neo-Nazi organization listed as a terrorist entity in Canada. The only reason this plot was uncovered and Patrick Matthews was implicated was because of the work of journalist Ryan Thorpe, who risked his life to get this information. In 2018 Toronto, a white incel by the name of Alec Minazian rented a van and ran over 11 people, most of them women. In 2017, Quebec City, a self-proclaimed white nationalist, Alexandre Bissonnet, entered the Islamic Cultural Center and opened fire on random Muslims, killing 6 men and injuring 19 others. When the news broke about this at the time, Canadian Reddit subs were yapping about this incident, and the dominant narrative at the time was that it was another Muslim who'd done it. In 2025, Dharmesh Kataria was stabbed to death by his neighbor in Rockland near Ottawa. This was a racially motivated hate killing that follows a worldwide Western trend of brutalizing brown people. It has become normalized. Ireland saw a series of these hate crimes targeting Indians. News like this has been coming out of Australia for as long as I can remember, honestly. So Australia is not surprising at all for me. They seem pretty proud of their racism. It's kind of tied up with their nationalism. The most recent atrocity, as of me writing this essay, was in the UK when 2 white men raped a Sikh woman and also told her to get out of their country. Is this English nationalism, raping people while calling yourself patriots? What's equally disgusting is how mainstream media did not bother covering that incident. The reason why so many give a pass to these crimes against humanity is because of racism. Every time you've joined in on a comment section, joking about wiping out Indians, there's too many, or Indian fatigue. Every time you ignore your family member or close friend who you know is racist and says racist shit all the time, every time you give them a pass, you are personally contributing to real life hate crimes and killings and rapes and violence. The Canadian government has also cited research that shows that interests in far-right extremist groups and influential leaders is rather unsurprisingly male-dominated, with the highest interest coming out of Ontario, Alberta, and BC in that order. The ideologies and grievances are, as I said before, imports of American and European far-right grievances. Many can't even bring themselves to look at a headline for more than half a second before swiping away if it has anything to do with race or hatred. because they feel like it doesn't concern them or their people. You cannot even fathom what coping with racial trauma feels like, what it means to be targeted for unchangeable physical attributes and characteristics that you do not control. If you cannot even stomach a headline, then you definitely have not thought about what a hate crime even is. A hate crime is not just a statistic. It is a rejection of the humanity of not just the victim, but the victim's entire community. It is a crime against humanity itself. It has far-reaching psychological effects when it happens that many people in the majority will not understand. When you know something like this has happened in your community, you walk around with a heightened sense of stress. You don't take unnecessary risks. You sometimes choose to stray away from certain public spaces that are dominated by certain demographics. You may even preemptively presume that something racist might be about to happen because, again, you fear for your safety. Because of unchangeable characteristics about yourself. You feel like you're in survival mode all the time. This reality is what a lot of people in the privileged majority who declare themselves as non-political dismiss as someone merely playing the race card, right? A lot of people just don't really get it. All women have a reference point for this, by the way. Like how women tend to have to be cautious around all men all the time, right? For fear of their safety, which, again, understandable. Anyway, I'm not going anywhere, so see ya.